Buenas, buenas. Welcome to IMSTA Atlanta. I'm Kevin Ochoa, and today we're going to be taking a look at Spire, which is a very powerful synthesizer that contains FM synthesis, wavetable synthesis, and subtractive synthesis. So, it has so many features that we cannot cover them. Even if we had like a 3-hour masterclass, it would still be very difficult to cover every single feature in detail. However, what we're going to do in this jam session is guide you through the basic synthesis sounds that you guys have to know how to make once you start producing music. So I'm going to teach you how to make the supersaw sound, some basic drums. I'm going to teach you how to make kick drums, which is very, very important, both in 808 and EDM kick drum. Then I'm going to show you how to make some basses and some pads. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to play a little demo track that I have here. It's just a basic EDM hardstyle track. There's nothing much to it, except there's some sounds there that I want to share with you guys. So let's play this. So there's the demo track. I apologize, I had the Sonarworks reference turned on. Usually I reference through this system here. Now what I'm going to try to focus on at first is the supersaws, because these are very important sounds that we use in pop music, hip hop, EDM, and of course big room house. Now let's solve this instrument. Now this is a more rawish type of supersaw. It doesn't have as much decay as you would find in trance music. So it's a lot more punchy. Now I'm going to clone this to initialize it. By the way, make sure you guys look at the chat below to see if you guys can pick up any of the goodies we're giving out here at IMSTA FESTA Atlanta. I'm going to go ahead and init this, and I'm going to go to this layer, and inside of the layer what I can do is tell FL to trigger all these synths at the same time. And now when I press that one note, let's turn on the reverbs or else this sounds ridiculous. When I layer the synths, basically all of them trigger at the same time. So it makes it a lot easier to program stacked supersaws. But right now, like I said, let's focus on this new one that we're making. I'm going to mute the these synths right here. And to begin with, this track is playing a monophonic lead, so let's turn this into a mono 1 lead. Second of all, we need to create a little glide. So let's add a little bend range, an octave up and an octave down. And now that's gliding smoothly. I'm going to now go to the oscillator section, to the unison mode, and here I can decide how many voices I want. Do I want 2? And you can hear how the stereo image is spreading now. And based on the detune, I can create some cool beating effect, which is actually what the supersaw is. It's just a bunch of supersaws. It's just a bunch of saws phasing with each other to create this really massive wall of sound. I'm going to push this up to 7. Hear that? Now, to emulate the JP8080 supersaw from Roland, you can choose 8 voices. And I think that was pretty much all you had. But with the virus, I know for a fact you can go up to 9 voices. And then you can use the density knob to change how close the saws are from each other. So if you pay close attention, you guys can hear the beating is really fast at first, and it's a lot slower on the saws that are at the edges. Whereas if I have the density lower, the density is much more consistent, or the beating sound or the phasing is much more consistent. So I can push this up to get that virus sound. Now on top of that, I can make this super wide. So now we have a lot of stereo information. Now the next thing I'm going to do here is use the filter. And by default, it's already set up under perfect mode or perfecto. There's a low pass, that's a 24 dB low pass filter already on there. The cutoff is pretty down low here. We can engage the keyboard tracking, so that if we're playing notes, the filter is going to play along with the keys that we're hitting. So in this case, I'm really have, just a basic one notes EDM track, so it's not noticeable until the very end. So it's important, especially if you're doing other genres of music, don't just stay and make a one-note song. It's very boring. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is engage the the envelope. I can make the decay a lot shorter in that filter. And the same thing with the release, or I can have it be a little bit longer, depending on how much of a pluck effect I want to give this lead. Now, the next thing I'm going to do here is also go to the envelope over here, give it some decay, and bring the sustain a bit down, and also give some release. I'm going to add a second oscillator here by copying and pasting this oscillator. Now I'm going to change the fine tuning on this one up 2 semitones, not 2 semitones, 2 cents. If I push this up higher, oh, I have to turn it on first. You get even more beating. So I'm going to keep it somewhere around here. And I'm going to pump up the filter. Turn off that oscillator. You hear that? It's pull this down. Now, if you noticed, there's a little bit too much detune on the leads. So something that happens is that if you put too much detune on these super saws, if you're trying to create more of a harmonic melody, so if it's not a one-shot melody, it starts to sound really weird and out of key. The same thing happens if you try to play chords. So if I were to pump up the detune pretty high and try to play just even a power chord, we start to get too much detune. So make sure you can tuck it right in over here, not having it beat so much. So I'm going to leave it around there. And I'm going to add a third oscillator. This one's going to go an octave down below. And I'm going to add a fourth one. And this is going to go an octave higher. Now the one that's below, I'm going to lower this to 8 voices, bring the density down, and also the detune. There we go. Now there's a few different features that we can add. We can add a distortion. But that's not what we're going to go for here. We can use a phaser. if we want that really psychedelic effect. Or we could do is use a chorus that's emulating the one from the JP 8000 or 8080. And listen to how wide it made the sound now. So we already were really wide. But then when we add a little bit more, we can make this even wider. Then there's a delay here. It's important to note that I was using a gross speed on this, which is why you heard a lot of pumping. Alright, let's play this in the context of the track. I'm going to mute the old supersaw that I had, and let this one play. And let's go back to the build-up. Oh, I should have turned on the reverbs. So there we go. We created a very basic supersaw patch. Again, you can use this type of sounds in hip-hop, EDM, hardstyle, whatever type of electronic music. These are very popular sounds. I'm going to go into the kick drum over here, which is very, very cool, I must say. It's just 2 patches of Spire. I'm going to solo it. Oh, there was a little glitch right there. It's really cool. So let's click on the pattern itself. And let's go to the one over here that's merged. Press Ctrl-D to deselect the range. And let's select the space right here. So basically we have a punch right here, courtesy of this Spire. And then we have a bass, courtesy of this Spire. Essentially, it's the same patch, except I've reduced the attack on the second patch and made the release even longer, and also extended the notes. If we go to the MIDI here, we can see how this MIDI for the punch of the kick drum is much shorter, and the one for the sustain portion of the bass is a bit longer. And I also have a gross speed on top of the bass itself to remove some of that punch as well. Hear that? That way I can remove the punch. And now I can mix them in together. I could even change the note on the bass line itself. Let's see. Let's pump it up. And then find one that sounds pretty good. I think the A one sounded okay on this one. And if that doesn't work, again, because we're using a very similar patch, I could grab them both together and pitch them up together. And now I'll have a complete new kick drum in the proper key for my track, which is so much, which has so much value. Usually people try to use samples, but it doesn't sound as good because you can't manipulate them as much, which is why it's very important to be able to synthesize your own drums. So let's go ahead and create some drums here. I'm going to clone this punch of the kick drum. Clone it. Now this is a very psytrance inspired kick drum. I'm going to cut the MIDI and paste it over here. And I'm going to init this. Now, when we play this, it's going to route to this reverb. I'm going to remove that. And it's going to play just a saw wave. Sorry about that. So let's turn this into a sine wave. And we get that. Let's lower the sustain. Make the decay a little bit long and the release a tiny bit long. And if we look at the fruity wave candy, the octave is pretty high up, so we gotta send this down probably 3 octaves. Cool. Now the next thing I'm gonna do is get an envelope and apply it to the pitch of the oscillator. And now we're getting a punchy thud inside of the kick drum. If we push the amounts up even higher, we get a more clicky, chirpy sound. Now, if we change the way the envelope works here, so if I click up here on the envelope, it makes a very drastic difference. So let's go ahead and bring this somewhere around here and also pump the decay. And if we go back here to the kick and increase the decay a bit, we get more of a psychedelic type of kick drum. I keep saying psychedelic, it's psytrance type of kick drum. If I were to make the pitch envelope a bit lower, and the decay envelope a bit lower, let's change the drums we got here. Let's make a different pattern. That's the wrong one, I'm on the bass. Here we go. If I were to make this more like a hip-hop pattern. Oh, I'm gonna go to pattern mode. Now this sounds more like an 808. If I were to extend the release even longer, we get more of that sustain. I'm gonna go to this shaper over here and drive it. So you get different flavors of distortion once you select different modes. I'm going to choose tube. Now check this out. If I use a high pass filter over here, I'm going to go to Infecto, high pass 2. Because I high pass some of the low frequencies, or the one low frequency, I can drive it pretty hard. To let the punch coming through cleanly, and then I can have some of those lows come back in through the distortion and create some harmonics on top. So now I get a sweet, really warm sounding kick drum. And if I were to reduce the attack a little bit, it sounds more like an 808. Let's increase the decay of it. You can even use the resonance here. To find a area of frequencies that you want to boost and cut through the mix a little bit better. or do the opposite. If we use a high pass or a low cut, I keep confusing the filters. If I use a low pass, and then I grab a use another low pass over here. If I use the envelope, I can control the way the frequencies are fed into the distortion unit. So it gives me lots of control. If I were to pitch this up a little bit, I'm going to change the attack of this. I get more of a tom sound. Let's reduce the distortion. Reduce the distortion. Sorry about that. I've been doing lots of videos in Spanish recently, so I'm having a hard time switching back into English. All right. There you go. We got some pretty decent toms. Let me reduce the low cut over here. Whoa. And just reduce the drive as well. All right. And of course, we got to make the release and the decay a bit shorter. There you go. So now we had paired this up with like a regular kick over here. We got some different rhythms going. Let's add a. Let's do reggaeton. Let's do quarter note. Boom. There. Another one there. Oops. Down there. And because you're synthesizing the sounds, you can completely tune them to your desired needs. Yeah, so it's very, very powerful. Very important that you learn how to create these basic sounds because, for example, if you're mixing and you're trying to get a nice tight low end on the punch of a snare, for example, on 150 hertz or 200 hertz, instead of trying to use an EQ, you can just cut that part off and use a synthesizer to replace that. So it's better to do this than to beat your head over and over again trying to create a really basic or fix a really basic instrument like a snare. You could just do it with Spire instead of with like EQ and a bunch of other mixing tricks. There you go. I'm going to return back to how I had the project earlier. And now let's try to create some pads over here really quickly before we run out of time. Let's see. Let's grab the notes, the one note melody, and then we're going to duplicate it over here. I'm going to make it unique. I'm going to solo it for a second, and then I'm going to clone. Let's clone the supersaw. Bring it down or up. I'm going to init it, and I'm going to go into the melody. I'm going to change the notes here. Make them a little bit more sustained. Oh, and of course I need to get out of the layer and paste it to the thing over here. I'm going to rename this pads. There we go. Oh. Yes, get me out of there. Okay. I'm going to move the mixer track over here to 41. Lower it. I'm going to lower the octave of this a bit lower. So we're playing around the 150 hertz range, somewhere around there. Let's get rid of these other notes. And we're almost done here. Okay, there we go. Now, what we'll do is go to the pads. And of course, it's just a saw right now. But to make a pad, essentially, we got to do the opposite of what we did with the leads and with the plucky part of the leads, where it was really choppy at first and it made a really plucky sound. We're going to do the opposite with the filter now. We're going to make this a cut right here. I'm going to change this to Infecto. Set it to 12 dB per octave. And then I'm going to change the cutoff to make it have a slower attack. And now the synth has a little swell coming into it. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the unison mode. And detune some of the saws. Let's add a little bit of reverb. Tiny bit of delay. Also, I don't know if I'm sidechaining anymore. No, I'm not sidechaining. Let's close this real quick. Okay, so now I'm going to add a second oscillator. And this, I'm going to make it a little bit more interesting. I'm going to go to the FM. Let's choose violin. And what I'll do is I'll lower the level on the first oscillator. You can kind of hear it. And over here, I'm going to go to the comb filter, and I'm going to route that second oscillator to the second filter. So it's going to go through the comb filter. I'm going to change the filter balance to be right in the center. That way the two signals don't interlap, or the first filter doesn't go into the second filter. And I'm going to go to the second envelope. I was going to say the fourth envelope over here. And send it to that second filter. And there we made a really crazy pad. Now, if you guys don't want to have so much modulation going on the pad, I would change the filter to something more simple, like a acid filter. And now we get something a little bit more normal to the human ear. Let's add a little bit of EQ on the high end. And if I wanted to give that violin sound a little bit more width, I could do so. Okay, and with that, we covered some of the basic functionality of Spire when it comes to sound design. We looked at how to make drums, pads, and the typical super saw. Make sure you guys see the comment section or the chat below to see if you guys can win any of the goodies we're giving out for IMSTA FESTA. And with that being said, I want to thank you guys for joining us here at IMSTA Atlanta. I'm Kevin Ochoa, and I hope to see you guys in a new IMSTA FESTA soon. All right, take care.